If you are a watcher of the royal family and you like secrets, you might want to sit down because this is a doozy.
Something extraordinary has just happened inside the private world of the British royal family. A move so quiet, so deliberate, and so final that it has left Queen Camilla in a state of silent fury, unlike anything seen in decades. No press release, no statement, no photograph. Just a single legal document signed in a private room at Buckingham Palace in the first weeks of 2026, transferring full ownership of a secret royal estate, a hidden Georgian retreat known only to a handful of people, directly into the hands of Catherine, Princess of Wales. King Charles has done it. He has given away the very property Camilla had quietly come to regard as hers. The sanctuary she believed would be her private escape for the rest of her life. And he did it without warning, without discussion, and without giving her the chance to object. In one stroke, Charles has redrawn the map of power inside the monarchy. He has secured the future for William and Catherine in a way no public ceremony ever could. And he has left Camilla watching from the edges, furious at what this single act truly signals about where the institution is heading and where she now stands. Something is happening behind the walls of Buckingham Palace. Not the kind of thing that gets announced in a press release, not the kind that appears in a carefully worded statement from the communications team, and certainly not the kind that makes its way into the morning papers with official confirmation. This is the quieter kind of shift. The kind that spreads through long corridors in hushed tones between senior staff. The kind that shows up in revised legal documents filed through private trusts. The kind that leaves certain members of the royal household suddenly finding themselves excluded from meetings they once attended as a matter of course. King Charles III is still on the throne. His face still appears at selected public engagements, composed, dignified, projecting exactly the image of stability the monarchy has always needed to project, regardless of what is happening behind those walls. But those who understand the inner machinery of the institution, the courtiers who have spent decades reading the smallest signals, know exactly what this latest move really means. Prince William is no longer simply the heir apparent. He is already the operational center of the crown, and in one quiet but extraordinarily decisive act, Charles has taken a step that secures the future for William and Catherine in a way that no public ceremony, no photo opportunity, and no formal announcement could ever achieve. At the heart of it all is a piece of real estate, so deliberately kept from public view that even most senior courtiers only learned of its existence in the last few weeks. A private estate, modest by royal standards yet symbolically enormous. A property that was never listed in any official portfolio, never photographed for society magazines, never mentioned in any coronation planning document, never included in any public tour of the Sandringham estate. Until now, King Charles has transferred full ownership and control of that secret estate directly to Catherine, Princess of Wales. And the woman who had quietly come to regard it as part of her own future, Queen Camilla, has been left, according to multiple insiders who have spoken on condition of anonymity, quietly and deeply furious. This is the story of a transfer that came at the exact moment the monarchy needed it most. A transfer that says more about where power truly lies today than any official announcement ever could. A transfer that reveals, in the gentlest yet most final way possible, exactly how the modern monarchy is preparing for the reign that will follow Charles. The crown that came too late, and the decision that could not wait any longer. Charles had waited 73 years for the throne. 73 years. That is how old he was when his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, passed away in September 2022 after 70 continuous years of reign. By any measure, it was the longest apprenticeship in the history of the British monarchy. Longer than most people's entire working lives, longer than most marriages, longer than the span of many entire dynasties in other countries. He had spent those decades shaping a very particular vision of what his reign would look like. A monarchy leaner, more accountable, more focused on the environment, on organic farming, on architecture, on the future of the Commonwealth. He believed, with genuine conviction, that his time as king would finally allow him to bring those long-held ideas directly into the heart of the institution. Then, the crown finally came. And almost immediately, everything shifted in ways he could not have fully anticipated. The public scrutiny was intense. The family fractures that had been managed during his mother's reign suddenly felt closer and more urgent. The question of whether an institution so deeply associated with the late queen could find a new identity under a very different kind of king hung in the air. Charles stepped into the role with visible seriousness. He understood the weight he had inherited. He was not naive about the challenges ahead. He had barely begun to answer those questions when the diagnosis arrived. February 2024, cancer. The palace confirmed it carefully, in language designed to convey seriousness without triggering alarm. Charles was receiving treatment. He remained committed to his duties. The public should be reassured. Behind that carefully calibrated language was a more difficult reality. A 75-year-old man, barely 18 months into the reign he had spent his entire adult life preparing for, confronting a disease that does not negotiate with royal schedules or ceremonial calendars. He returned to public duties relatively quickly, but those who watched him closely noticed something that could not be managed away by any amount of palace planning. The ease that had once carried him through a full day of royal engagements was gone. In its place was a slower, more deliberate pace, a man conserving energy, choosing his appearances with precision, performing his role with genuine care and dignity, while his body fought something the public was never given the full details of. His treatment continued throughout 2024 and well into 2025. Each palace update was worded with exquisite caution. Progress was implied. Details were withheld. Full remission was never confirmed. A complete return to his previous level of royal duties was never promised. Think about what that actually means. Over a year of active cancer treatment, a king still performing the functions of his role, meeting prime ministers, carrying out investitures, maintaining the ceremonial weight of the crown, while managing a disease serious enough to require constant medical adjustment. Those who spent time with him in early 2026 described a man who was still engaged, still thoughtful, still performing his duties with real commitment, but the restless energy that had always defined him had been replaced by something quieter, more resigned. He was a king still doing his job. He was also a man coming to terms with the gap, the growing gap between what he had once planned for his reign and what time and health would actually allow him to accomplish. That gap, more than anything else, is what his family found hardest to watch. And it is what ultimately forced the decision we are talking about today. Before we reach the secret estate itself, we need to understand the context that made this transfer not just possible, but necessary. Because what happened with Prince Andrew in the autumn of 2025 set the stage for everything that followed. The Jeffrey Epstein files had been a recurring wound in the royal family's side for years. Andrew's civil settlement with Virginia Giuffre in 2022, his gradual removal from public royal life, the calculated management that kept him close enough to the family, that total abandonment seemed cruel but distant enough from official duties that the palace could maintain its position. It was a compromise that satisfied almost no one and solved almost nothing. By 2025, the documentation circulating was different, more detailed, more specific. Andrew's name appeared throughout it, in ways that could no longer be deflected with the old palace statements. Public pressure became significant. Press pressure became relentless. Inside Buckingham Palace, the calculation had shifted. Every day that Andrew continued to live at Royal Lodge, surrounded by the physical trappings of his former royal status, was a day the crown's credibility was quietly eroded. The institution could no longer afford to manage the problem. It needed to resolve it. In October 2025, Charles made the decision he had been building toward for years. Andrew was formally stripped of his remaining royal associations. He was asked to vacate Royal Lodge. It was the most definitive action the palace had taken on the Epstein question, and the public received it largely as evidence that the institution was finally willing to take the problem seriously. But understand what that decision actually cost Charles personally. Andrew is his younger brother. Whatever the public thought of Andrew's conduct and associations, the private reality of removing a sibling from the home and the life he had always known was painful. Charles had spent years hoping the controversy would settle. The decision to finally act came from a clear-eyed recognition that the cost of continued inaction had become too high for the institution to bear. He made the right call institutionally. It was necessary and overdue. But it cost him something personally, and the people around him could see it in the weeks that followed. A king already managing a serious illness had also just been forced to push his own brother out of his home. And at that exact moment, the question inside the palace became unavoidable. At what point does the accumulation of these pressures, the illness, the treatment, the painful family decisions, the institutional weight, begin to change the math on who is actually capable of running the monarchy day to day? William was already watching. William was already ready. The shift in William's role happened the way all real power shifts happen inside the British monarchy. Gradually, through an accumulation of responsibilities, through expanded access, through the steady repositioning of an institution that had quietly made a decision about where its future lay. There was no press conference, no formal declaration, no ceremony with flags and fanfare. William's schedule had grown significantly by the middle of 2025. Not in the way an heir's schedule grows when a parent is temporarily unwell, but in scale and character that made clear he was being positioned as the primary voice. The clearest public signal came when William traveled to Brazil to represent the United Kingdom at COP30. Charles did not go. William did. And he did not simply fill a seat. He engaged with the substance, with the policy, with world leaders in a way that made clear this was no ceremonial substitution. Back in Britain, the changes were less visible, but even more significant. William's household began receiving briefings, once routed exclusively through Charles's office. The official justification was continuity planning. That explanation was not inaccurate, but it described only part of what was happening. The access William was gaining went well beyond contingency. Senior figures were engaging with him as the primary decision-maker on strategic questions. And William's handling of the Andrew situation gave the palace exactly what it needed. Evidence that he could make difficult decisions under pressure without sentiment overriding institutional judgment. Catherine's own recovery and return to fuller royal duties during this same period added an important dimension. Her presence alongside William gave their partnership a stability and completeness that went far beyond optics. She had approached her return with a focus that impressed those around her, deliberate choices about where to direct her energy, building a substantive body of work around early childhood development that gave her role genuine depth. This was not a couple managing appearances. This was two people quietly constructing something together, something the palace could present to the world as a foundation rather than a placeholder. And then there was Camilla. Camilla's position before any of this unfolded had been earned slowly, painfully, over decades of sustained patience and discipline. When she married Charles in April 2005, large portions of the British public still viewed her with open hostility. The history of her relationship with Charles, the years of affair, the collapse of his marriage to Diana, the grief and anger that followed Diana's death, all of it had created a depth of public feeling that simple PR could not address. She stayed out of controversy. She performed her duties without seeking attention. She let time work on the public's perception. By the time Charles became king, her position had stabilized considerably. She was named queen in the coronation, a decision that stirred debate, but ultimately passed without derailing the day. The long rehabilitation had largely worked. Then, the Epstein files came back, and this time they reached further. The documentation released in 2025 began extending its focus beyond Andrew himself to the broader social network surrounding Epstein and his associates. In that network, a name appeared with enough frequency and in enough detail to revive intense public interest: Sarah Ferguson. The former wife of Prince Andrew had previously acknowledged receiving financial assistance through Epstein and had issued a public apology. That apology had mostly settled the matter on the surface, but the coverage that followed went significantly further. And here is the detail that connected Camilla directly to all of it: the genuine friendship between Sarah Ferguson and Camilla over the years. In normal circumstances, this would have been a minor footnote. In the context of fresh Epstein coverage generating intense pressure on everyone connected to Andrew's world, it became something the palace could not dismiss. William made his position clear. The continued public visibility of that friendship was a risk the institution could no longer afford to carry. The message that reached Camilla was direct. The friendship with Sarah needed to end, or at the very minimum needed to become entirely invisible. This was framed as institutional necessity, not personal judgment, a cold calculation about reputational risk at a moment when the palace could not afford additional exposure. Camilla understood exactly what was being asked. In the weeks that followed, she went mute on the matter entirely. Her public schedule continued without interruption, but the silence was noticed. Journalists began asking questions. Columnists who had written about her generously began publishing more cautious pieces. The carefully managed image of Camilla as the stable, uncontroversial presence beside the king was developing visible cracks. And for Charles, a man already managing cancer treatment, already carrying the personal cost of what he had done to Andrew, already watching his son quietly absorb the operational weight of the crown, the effect was devastating. He had fought for Camilla's place in this institution for decades. The thought that her position was now generating institutional risk at the very moment when his own health was limiting his ability to manage that kind of crisis was not abstract. It was deeply, personally distressing. It was against this background that Charles began to look at the private estates he still controlled personally, properties held outside the formal crown estate in the Duchy of Cornwall, passed down through private trusts, invisible to the public balance sheet. One of those properties had remained a closely guarded secret for years. It is known within the family simply as the Retreat, a graceful Georgian house set on 80 acres of private woodland and parkland on the outer edge of the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. Not grand enough to be called a palace, not modest enough to be dismissed as a cottage. It sits tucked behind ancient trees, approached by a long private drive that keeps it completely hidden from public roads. The house itself is elegant but understated. High ceilings, large windows looking out over rolling parkland, a small stable block, a walled garden that Prince Philip himself once admired. It was the kind of place Philip might have chosen for quiet reflection in his later years. Private, self-contained, deliberately removed from the ceremonial heart of royal life. For decades it sat empty, maintained by a skeleton staff, its existence known only to a handful of trustees and the monarch himself. Charles had always intended the Retreat as a personal gift for Camilla, a place where she could escape the pressures of public life, a quiet acknowledgement of the decades she had waited at his side. Camilla had been told as much. She had even visited the property privately on several occasions. She had begun to speak of it in the most discreet circles, as her future sanctuary. But something fundamental changed in the final months of 2025. The Epstein shadow would not disappear. The friendship with Sarah Ferguson had become a liability. William's circle was tightening, and Charles, already conserving energy, began to see the future with different eyes. He saw a future in which Catherine would need every possible foundation of privacy and security. A future in which the Princess of Wales, already carrying the weight of public expectation after her own health challenges, would require a place that belonged to her alone, not subject to the shifting politics of the royal household. A place where William and Catherine could raise their 3 children away from cameras, away from scrutiny, away from the next wave of documents or scandals that might yet emerge. A place that could never be taken away by any future decision or institutional pressure. So, in the first weeks of 2026, without fanfare, without any announcement, and without informing Camilla until the paperwork had already been signed and sealed, King Charles transferred the retreat, lock, stock, and freehold, into Catherine's personal ownership. The documents were executed through the same private trust that had held the property for decades. The transfer was absolute. No lease, no life interest, no right of reversion. It now belongs to Catherine outright, to do with as she and William see fit for the rest of their lives and beyond. Think about what that actually means. A property that Camilla had quietly come to regard as hers, a symbol of the place she had finally earned in the family after decades of patience, was gone. Not taken by force, not seized in anger, but calmly, deliberately, and irrevocably reassigned by the man who had once promised it to her. The message was unmistakable. Charles was no longer managing the present. He was securing the future, and that future had Catherine at its center. The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla continued her public schedule with the same composed reliability she has always shown. She attended engagements, smiled for the cameras, performed her duties without a single visible crack. But inside the palace, the atmosphere shifted in ways that only those who know how to read the unspoken language of royal life could detect. Camilla's inclusion in certain strategic conversations diminished further. Her input on matters concerning the private estates was no longer routinely sought. The circle that had once widened to accommodate her had begun, once again, to narrow, this time decisively around William and Catherine. Ask yourself this: how does a woman who spent decades fighting for acceptance inside this institution feel when the man she stood by for 40 years chooses, in one quiet legal stroke, to give away the very symbol of that acceptance to the woman who will one day replace her? The answer, according to those who have watched this family for years, is a mixture of fury and resignation. Fury because the transfer felt personal. Resignation because she understands better than anyone that the institution always comes first. And right now the institution has decided that its long-term survival rests with William and Catherine, not with any lingering questions attached to Camilla's past associations. Charles's own health has played its part. Those who saw him in early 2026 describe a man still thoughtful, still engaged, but visibly conserving every ounce of energy. He knows the gap between what he once planned for his reign and what time will actually allow him. In that knowledge lies the reason for this transfer. He is not abdicating. He is not stepping aside formally. But he is doing what monarchs who understand their own mortality have always done. He is building foundations that will outlast him. Catherine now holds a private anchor that no future controversy can easily touch. A home that is hers by right, not by favor. A place where the Wales family can retreat without asking permission from any household office, without navigating any intermediary, without the risk of future eviction or reallocation. For William, it is more than property. It is proof. that his father has chosen to protect the next reign before his own is even over. And for Camilla, it is the clearest signal yet that the center of gravity has moved. The woman who once rebuilt her image through patience and quiet discipline now finds herself watching from the edges as the future is quietly secured without her. This is how the modern monarchy manages transition, not with announcements and fanfare and television cameras, but with documents signed in private rooms, with properties reassigned in silence, with power shifting 2 miles at a time across the same estate, while the world sees nothing but unbroken continuity. The retreat is not a palace. It is not even a lodge in the grand sense. But in the quiet arithmetic of royal power, it may prove to be one of the most significant transfers of this entire reign, because it tells us exactly where Charles believes the monarchy's future strength lies. Not in the past he shared with Camilla, but in the partnership he sees between William and Catherine. What happens next will depend on many things: on Charles's continuing health, on whether new Epstein documents or new pressures emerge, on how Camilla chooses to respond to the shrinking circle around her, on whether William and Catherine decide to make any visible use of the retreat or keep it as the private sanctuary it was always intended to be. But one thing is already clear inside Buckingham Palace: the decision has been made. The future has been anchored, and the woman who once stood at the very center of Charles's world has been reminded, in the gentlest yet most final way possible, that the institution she helped stabilize is now looking beyond her. King Charles III remains on the throne. Let us be absolutely clear about that. He is still meeting with the Prime Minister. He is still performing his ceremonial duties with the dignity and care that have defined his public life. He has not abdicated. He has not been removed. But in the quiet transfer of one secret estate on the edge of Sandringham, he has drawn a line that no official statement will ever acknowledge. Yet everyone who matters inside the monarchy now understands completely. A king who waited 73 years for the crown has chosen to spend what time remains to him securing the reign that will follow his own. And in doing so, he has left the woman who waited beside him for decades facing a future that looks very different from the one she once imagined. Now ask yourself the question that those closest to the palace are already asking in private. Do you believe Charles made the right choice by securing Catherine's position so definitively and so secretly at this moment? Or does this quiet transfer reveal something deeper about how the monarchy handles its own, prioritizing the next generation so completely that those who helped build the present are quietly moved to the side? And do you think Camilla will accept this new reality with the same patience and discipline she once showed the public all those years ago? Or has the combination of the Epstein shadow, the shrinking circle, and this final transfer already drawn a line that cannot be walked back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations matter more than the palace will ever admit, because the perspectives from outside the walls often see the human cost that those inside are trained never to show. If you want to stay across every development in this unfolding story, because the next chapter, like this one, may arrive without any warning at all, make sure you are subscribed. The moment anything shifts inside the royal estates, inside the power structure, or inside the delicate balance between Charles, William, Catherine, and Camilla, you will be the first to know. The monarchy does not announce its deepest changes. It simply lets them happen. And right now, one of the most significant has already taken place.